Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to think about the future of our great city. This evening's presentation is being live streamed using the technology that was invested in by City Council and the administration 2 years ago. And in fact, this is one of many live streaming events that have occurred here. In addition, it is being recorded. It will be placed on the website so others will be able to view it at their leisure. In fact, I know that there are several others, particularly our Board of Education tonight, who have a compelling better offer. I got a note from Superintendent Patterson saying I will be unable to attend your State of the City. Lakewood is playing St. Ed's in a district semifinal at 7 p.m. in Strongsville at the same time. I responded that I've thought of every way possible, and I just can't get out of giving this speech, so I regret that I won't be able to join you. I did ask him to text me the score at halftime, so we may get an update there. And we wish both teams well, and it's an important event. Of course, St. Ed's is a perennial contender in these events, and Lakewood is not, so it's a pretty special showdown for both those good teams. So we certainly give the school board a good pass, and we'll miss them tonight. We do have several folks that I do want to acknowledge. Chief among us is our county executive, Armin Budish. Armin, if you would kindly stand. We're grateful to have you in Lakewood tonight. And also serving and representing our region and county council is Dale Miller. Dale, if you would kindly stand. My fellow colleagues in city government are with us. Representing Ward 1, I'll just go down in the order that you're sitting. Dave Anderson from Ward 1. Dave. Ward 2 and City Council President Sam O'Leary. Ward 3, John Litton. Ward 4, Dan O'Malley. And at large, Megan George. And I know that both Tom Bullock and Tristan Rader were unable to attend tonight by a prior conflict. We work carefully with many important elements of leadership in this town. And I know Patty Ryan of the Chamber of Commerce. Patty, we thank you for being here tonight and your leadership. And Jim Crawford as well, representing one of the other governmental institutions, our public library. And a special guest this evening is Jim Heckman. Jim, I know you're in the back. If you'd kindly stand. Many of you may have had a chance to meet Jim. But Jim is a physician, and his responsibilities are to oversee the performance of the Family Health Center, which is scheduled to open this July. So thank you, Jim, for being here in Lakewood. And I would like to acknowledge the directors, if you'd all stand. We have Bryce Sylvester, Economic Development, Law Director Kevin Butler, Tony Gelsomino, Human Services. We have Jean Yousefi of Human Resources, Joe Benno, Director of Public Works, Jen Pay of Finance, and Chief Gilman. And I know in the back is Police Chief Tim Malley. And these directors, of course, work very hard, and they are the ones who deliver the day-to-day government that's so important to us all. And I'm very proud of them, and I'm very grateful for their dedication on behalf of our great city and service to our citizens. So this evening, I'd like to acknowledge Wendy, actually. I should do that. Wendy, if you would kindly stand. My wife, Wendy, who has many dinners alone, which she is very patiently willing to do, and I'm grateful for that. So this evening, we will spend time thinking about the city's future. Now, Wilbur Wright, one of the Wright brothers, in a speech to the Aero Club of France on the 5th of November, 1908, said, "I confess that in 1901, I said to my brother Orville that man would not fly for 50 years. Ever since, I've distrusted myself and avoided all predictions." So we are not here to predict the future. We're only here to acknowledge it. Just as we cannot direct the wind, we can only adjust our sails to it, and that's what we're going to think about doing tonight. These are the important goals that drive our thinking and actions in just about every way. They are central to every strategy: sound governance, safe and secure city, economic development, and vibrant neighborhoods. This is my 8th State of the City address. The customary content of this address and the previous 7 has covered finances, projects, accomplishments, projects looming. This year, I will take a different approach. The details are important, but they have and will be shared elsewhere. You have a handout which actually shares the objectives, more of the tactical objectives for 2018. Those are very important to us. We mailed out a newsletter to 30,000 households at a cost of 29 cents per household. We shared a lot of information and details there. We'll be sharing other details that are important. But tonight, I will focus on the mega forces working for and against our city and how we expect to approach them. By the way, these same forces are at play against most cities, some more than others, but tonight we're going to be thinking about their impact on our city, Lakewood. Resiliency requires forward thinking. That is what we will do tonight. We will think forward. If I told you that these things would happen in the next 10 years, you might not believe me. Once in a century economic downturn, record devastation from an East Coast superstorm, significant loss of urban investment by federal and state governments, tumult in national strategies relating to health care, generational behavioral shifts, particularly the millennials born between 1983 and 1993. Political stalemate, Washington, D.C. Cities and counties filing for bankruptcy. 7 major mass shootings. Looking backward 10 years, all of these things did happen. And all of them had a direct or indirect impact on how our city thinks and behaves. Our mandate as stewards of Lakewood's future is purposeful planning with a focus on resiliency. These plans must address the local effects of climate change, globalization, population growth, overconsumption, housing insecurity, rising healthcare costs, and many more. It is worth reflecting on the momentous events of the past 10 years to remind us of the almost certainty that similar events are likely to happen in the decade ahead. The mega forces at play are mentioned here. Environmental and regulatory forces, federal and state government, transportation, healthcare, public safety, energy reliability, economic and market forces, technology, and population dynamics. Some of these are not adverse. Some, in fact, are great opportunities. Transportation is a great opportunity. We're going to explore each of these forces briefly tonight and their impact on our community and how we intend to address them. This diagram illustrates 2 major forces, Mother Nature and the regulatory enforcement environment. The subject of EPA compliance is the most pressing strategic force facing the city of Lakewood. And that's because we have a hard deadline of March 2019, 1 year from now, in which we will be required to submit a plan of how we will comply with the Clean Water Act of 1972. Over the next year, we will spend significant time and energy sharing, discussing, and finalizing this comprehensive stormwater management plan. We've been working towards this deadline for a decade. The increased water and sewer rates that we reported in the newsletter reflect the millions of dollars required for the investments and the necessary rates to afford them. A good example of our challenges happened just a few months ago. This past October, we had 0.8 inches of rain in Lakewood in 20 minutes. 0.8 inches of rain, 20 minutes. Historically, that was an 11-year storm. It was the kind of storm that only happened once every 11 years. But as a practical matter today, that type of storm is happening every 3 years. So the intensity of what we're dealing with in terms of Mother Nature's impact and how it affects our stewardship of our environment, particularly our watershed, is a major challenge and a moving target. So what you see here is actually our sewer system, which on an everyday basis can handle 10 times the amount of dry weather flow, just fine. But in a big storm, the whole sewer system fills up. And you note it as it shows here that it is designed to overflow into our watershed, which is generally Lake Erie. It was designed that way in the 1910s, 20s, 30s. It behaves as designed, but by today's standards, it's unacceptable by government and even by our own standards. But the challenge, the engineering challenge and the financial challenge of addressing that is very compelling. So that's number 1 force we're going to talk about. The historical partnerships between cities and state and federal governments is fractured. County Executive Budish is very fond of saying there is no cavalry, and he's right. Lakewood lost $3 million annually since 2013 as a result of the state of Ohio's view of its cities. I thought this was primarily an Ohio problem, but in fact, it was an Ohio problem defined by rural versus urban, which sometimes is couched as a partisan issue of Republican versus Democrats, but in my opinion, it's really a rural versus urban question. But when I attended the U.S. Conference of Mayors this past January in Washington, I learned, as I began to articulate some of my concerns about my challenges as a mayor of Lakewood, that this is in fact a national phenomenon. The best example of disinvestment is measured as mass transit dollars per person. Pennsylvania spends $85 per person for mass transit. Michigan spends $24. Indiana spends $8.50 per person. West Virginia spends $1.50 per person in mass transit. And Ohio invests 69 cents per person. We're heading the wrong direction, especially in the urban environment, especially one that does well with mass transit. And the recognition of how we're going to fix this is really more a matter of local control than ever today. And that's going to put some burdens and some challenges, but we'll have to accept that responsibility. By and large, these problems are common among cities. It's not unique to just this region. Lakewood must join, lead, and support coalitions more than ever at the county level, regional mayors groups, statewide mayors and city council coalitions, national mayors and city council coalitions. We can band together more effectively, one, to learn from one another, benchmark each other for success, share good ideas, and to the extent we can, help create a regulatory environment and support environment that's better. But I think we all understand in the end, we're on our own. Whoops, wait a minute. A little challenge here. Public safety. Threats to our safety are real in big and small ways, from active shooters to robberies with car thefts, something we've experienced recently here, to menacing and everything in between. Here we see a matrix of all the existing public surveillance cameras that we currently have. 30 more will be added over the next 2 years, expanding coverage to every intersection on Detroit and Madison. We are investing in training. We are anticipating trends under the leadership of Police Chief Malley and Fire Chief Gilman. We are focused on increased productivity of our safety forces in ways we've never imagined. This means making significant annual investments in the best tools and technology available, as well as maintaining size and strength of force. The nature of the threats we face, are more compelling than ever. Whoops, let me go back here. And more than ever, we need the eyes and ears of our citizens. Citizens living in our neighborhoods have a keen sense of what seems to make, what belongs there and what doesn't. There's no way we can protect our city without leveraging each other and working in partnerships with the eyes and ears of our citizens. And we're expanding and introducing some tools that we'll see later this fall that will allow us to share information and hopefully collect information from you in ways that we've never been able to do before. Healthcare. Healthy neighbors make for vibrant neighborhoods. Chronic conditions lead the way in our city as well as most other cities. Too many are not receiving primary care. 70%, I've learned, of the determinants of our health are lifestyle choices: smoking, alcohol and drugs, nutrition, and exercise. We need to address those. For too many of us, there are significant challenges to affordability and cost management. For too many, we have difficulty navigating the complex world of follow-up and specialty care. Rapidly changing technology of care delivery creates opportunity and hope, as well as uncertainty and confusion. Those are some of the challenges we face. But actually, we have some great and exciting news about 2018. It's a watershed moment for us in terms of health in Lakewood. Several initiatives will emerge and converge that have significant health-related resources. Our Family Health Center is expected to open this July under the leadership of Jim Heckman and the Cleveland Clinic with significant and expanded resources in a brand new facility. We have 2 local health-related foundations that are emerging in our Cleveland. The legacy of the Lakewood Hospital Foundation, now called 3 Arches, has re-established their mission and their focus, and our citizens in Lakewood are working hard on a foundation planning task force to design and create the new foundation as a result of the transformation of Lakewood Hospital. That's a community hospital, our community health foundation that we will see take shape later this year, and the fruits of that will be evident in years to come. So not only will we have one, but we'll have two foundations, which is a remarkable advantage for a community like Lakewood. Lakewood High School, under the leadership of the Board of Education, has established a health center with very unique features. Working in conjunction with the Cleveland Clinic, they have established mental health services to our students at Lakewood High School. They have social workers. They have a vastly expanded view of health and the follow-up health that will allow our teenagers among us to address and get better health care in ways that we've never been able to experience here. We have the active living investments. Again, the Board of Education had the foresight to put a 3-lane, 10-lap per mile track while they expanded their new facility. That's a year-round access to our citizens, and they create our ability to continue to move. Project SOAR is in month 3 with good signs of success of our anti-opiate overdose intervention. We have a big data pilot, which I'll be talking about in a moment, that some members who are driving that are here with us today. So in a remarkable sense, we have this convergence of all these forces. But our challenge is to create alignment and leverage each of these in ways we've never thought possible to advance the health of a community. And remember that healthy neighbors make for vibrant neighborhoods. So the big data pilot is an interesting dimension. 5 companies, 4 of them located and with principals who live in Lakewood, found themselves, and they found us. They've identified Lakewood as a prime location for a data-driven approach to improved health. We have invested $50,000 of public money in a pilot study to leverage their private investment to identify data sources, develop analytics, identify priorities regarding our community health and its opportunities for improvement. This will provide strategic context and focus for Lakewood's government, for our nonprofits, for our foundations, our employers, and certainly for our citizens to better invest in improved health. This should be a catalyst for further public and private investment. And the companies are listed there: MD Logic, Pandata, Nubo Health, Upshot Healthcare, and Balance. Those are 5 individual companies, very entrepreneurial, each bringing a unique dimension to the aspect of data-driven approaches to improved health. And it's a complex world of healthcare, as we know, and seeking focus and patterns and trends is a unique opportunity. And we're going to be working hard to achieve that, and we expect to get some good results. Transportation. 10 years ago, who would have imagined that the rideshare industry of Uber and Lyft would exist? Estimates of autonomous vehicles from the world's car makers range from 2020 for highway driving to 2025 for complete autonomous driving, all conditions. That's just around the bend. Billions are being spent. This is a very exciting trend for a city not built for the 40,000 vehicles that reside here on a nightly basis. We can and should imagine a community where autos are shared more than ever, multiple car ownership could be dramatically reduced for a family, and parking should be profoundly different in both its need and its location. This particular force should be recognized in every major economic investment going forward that is made, especially at the future site of Bell in Detroit. And it's not hard to imagine an autonomous circulator working exceptionally well in our city. Energy reliability. This is a familiar scene. This was down on Lake Avenue after Superstorm Hurricane Sandy, and we know tonight in New England that scene is showing up probably all over the Boston and the Atlantic seaboard. It was a common sight for us on a few occasions, and we know nationally it is a really common sight. So this is an example of energy unreliability, and when it gets knocked out as violently as it did, it takes an enormous amount of effort to restore it. And we also know that our quality of life in so many ways is dependent on reliability of energy, particularly electrical energy. So the opportunity for us, though, is reflected in this slide. Now, this is a picture of a neighborhood we know well. It's St. Charles, Onondaga, Warren, and Victoria, a small snapshot. And this is a tool that shows the probability of a rooftop and its potential for solar generation. Brighter yellow means likely south-facing roof with a good probability of generating solar power. The interesting thing here, and there's many aspects of this is that not every roof can generate solar power like others. And so what we experience today is a macrogrid, where electrons are generated at a point certain. They're sent one way, away, and they're consumed in some degree of reliability or unreliability. As a practical matter, the national macrogrid that we have today is about 50% efficient, which means about half the energy that we actually produce doesn't get consumed. It has nowhere to go. It can't be stored. It can't be returned. It goes and evaporates into the ground or into the air. We can do better than that. We have to, not only from a cost standpoint, and certainly in terms of reliability. Microgrids, something we'll get to know better, it could come to a neighborhood near you. It's based on energy grids where electrons move two ways. We create them and consume them, perhaps on the same spot or nearby. Energy is created locally, used and stored locally. And it's stored and can be stored for use later, particularly in a big storm. Now, that technology is changing very rapidly, and there actually is a pilot test being championed by Cleveland State downtown. And we have a great opportunity in Lakewood to understand how that technology, as it emerges in the near term, can dramatically improve our reliability and the quality of energy, as well as our environmental stewardship. Economic forces, we know, are always relentless. Lakewood's economic engine has and will continue to be residential neighborhoods. The great housing bust of 2008 through 2010 was very threatening to us. Today, we celebrate over 180 new housing units added in the last few years, with more on the way. A remarkable feat for a city that was fundamentally built up by 1939. Most remarkable to me is that the economics of building a one-at-a-time house is favorable in Lakewood. In fact, this is evidence of that. Single-family homes are being built on Ednola, Gladys, Plover, Hopkins, and several other streets. Over the next several years, we'll see these homes. They'll be great second-century homes for Lakewood families, and they're going to be in our neighborhoods. Market forces. The redevelopment of Bell and Detroit is our biggest development since the Gold Coast of the late 1950s, early 1960s. This project is at its very beginning stages. We must deliver a sustainable and impactful project, but the marketplace is our partner in shaping this project. Compelling forces shape the development opportunities of a project of this magnitude. For example, the future of retail. Historically, the dominant approach used by cities for downtown redevelopment, but clearly retail is changing. And as we speak, the questions of what type of retail, if any, should be here or anywhere remain a great source of uncertainty. The future of work versus the mobility of work, home or anywhere else. There are many, many stories in neighborhoods, several on Alameda, right up the street from where we stand tonight, where folks have moved to Lakewood from more expensive cities, particularly the coasts, because they could work here, live here, and work and support that the job that previously required them to be in those big cities. So the idea of living here and work anywhere with the mobility of work is a trend that is very clear, and I think will grow as well. And the expectations of the workforce of the future, what the nature of work, what people will choose to do, is a dramatic aspect. So we are working on the terms of the agreement between the city and the developer as we speak, and we'll be working with City Council in the very near term here to understand what those terms are and hopefully move to the next stage. This project is complex, and it will require a significant amount of energy, time, and effort on the part of all of us for years to come. Now, one thing that's important too is that we have defined processes that allow us to work these projects successfully. Regional economic competitiveness. County Executive Budish, this is certainly a story that you are familiar with and it's very important to us. Today, across the country, there are regional winners and losers. Hyperloop, depicted here, is a great example. Imagine traveling from Cleveland to Chicago in 30 minutes. The technology is available. The economics and the engineering, of course, remain challenging. But for centuries, transportation corridors have driven economic development. We know that from the time of paddling a canoe to rivers, to canals, to railroads, and to airports, and everything in between. Those have been the dominant, and highways have been the dominant way that economic corridors have developed. So we have to pay very close attention to this emerging trend, and we have to be a winner in it. So what you see is an example of what a Hyperloop train would look like, if we call it a train. It works in a vacuum tube. But the most important thing is the map. The map shows where it could go or where it might not go. We really need to make sure we work regionally, and Lakewood has a strong role here to make sure that that Hyperloop goes through Cleveland. Without it, I think we'll find ourselves in the second half of this century less competitive, and we must not let that happen. So we have a disproportionate opportunity to lead and an obligation to help show the way. We don't necessarily know what that is on this particular project, but regional economic competitiveness is part of, I think, the DNA of our leadership here. Population dynamics. Cindy Marks, former city councilman, is in this picture, sitting in the back. 3 generations in this picture, all seeking the same lifestyle: local, walkable, and non-car dependent. The 2005 Grow Lakewood Task Force recognized then that only 30% of the millennials grew up in a pre-World War II house. The task force feared that the other 2/3 would reject our older homes. What we failed to understand then, and hopefully do now, is that the house was only part of the equation. The neighborhood, not the house, was the other 2/3. And by that standard, Lakewood is a clear winner. The fact that Lakewood is the millennial center of the region proves this point overwhelmingly. We have to continue to leverage that. A very compelling trend in its infancy is the Internet of Things. The network of the future is being built as we speak. AT&T, Cruise, and others in Lakewood, you see their trucks all around, running cable, underground, up in the air, are all working to build the 5th generation, 5G, network that will serve both people and things as never imagined. Autonomous vehicles, smart homes, smart cities are in prototype across the nation. In fact, down I-71 from us, Columbus received a $20 million federal grant to pioneer some of these ideas. While there has been pushing and shoving at the statewide level about the private use of public right-of-ways, it's important that we understand this trend and embrace its future. Here in Lakewood, I expect us to invest and gain additional private investment in the Internet of Things. Another example that will be emerging of public-private partnerships. Well, we've covered a great deal of ground in a very brief fashion by identifying these trends and the forces that drive them and our approach to them in a very general way. Each of these points is worthy of a lengthy discussion on their own. In fact, I expect to have and be part of many communications, many conversations, many community engagements on each of these conversations. And I would expect that our new Resiliency Task Force will lead us in how we can make good use of the energy from those community conversations. So part of your assignment here today is to take heed of these forces. Perhaps many of you do already, but understand that they are relentless, they're compelling, they're coming our way, and we need to understand how to manage them and make them our friends. The very good news, in my opinion, is Lakewood has a great deal going for it, more so than most. The inherent strengths of Lakewood are formidable. No one is building streetcar suburbs anymore with a grid-like system that we have today, nor are we creating lakefront property, nor are we building neighborhoods within 7 miles of downtown, or in 20 minutes from the airport, in minutes from a major highway intersection, east-west, north-south. I often mention to others the good news, in my opinion, is that no mayor can screw up these inherent and formidable advantages that Lakewood has. But in addition to these inherent advantages, I say with confidence and experience that we have a very strong and unique community. In addition to the inherent strengths, we have some cultural DNA that is noteworthy. We can get the right people in a room to make things happen. We do it all the time. Our relatively small geographical size, coupled with our unparalleled density, makes us an ideal laboratory for innovation. Many are recognizing it. The Big Data Pilot is a good example of that. Project SOAR is another good example of that. Our citizens' passion and engagement creates energy for action. We see evidence of that all the time here in Lakewood, weekly. We must keep our door open to the many opportunities to innovate and not be afraid to test the future. Now, citizen engagement is critical to our thinking. The intellectual capital we recognize is a vast dimension. It's baked into our thinking in so many ways. And this is an important reminder of what those ways are. Our boards and commissions engage 200 citizens on a regular basis to do the heavy lifting of daily regulatory decisions in our city. The Planning Commission will be overseeing the Resiliency Task Force. It's a new role for them. It's one that they're uniquely capable of, and allow us to use the 6-year terms of that Planning Commission to stand the test of time, because the subjects that are upon that task force will take decades to evolve. Public-private partnerships are emerging in creative ways. The Resiliency Task Force is being formed, 13 members, 7 appointed by City Council, 6 by the mayor's office. That group will be led by Rethink Advisors, a very notable expert in this field, a group of individuals out of Case Western Reserve who will make sure we get off to a good start and make sure we think as well as we should. There are other industry experts. The Big Data Group, and there are some members here in the room as well, are also part of that expertise. The energy industry has to be part of our conversations, and they will be. And that energy industry considers what the here and now piece is, the coal-fired power plants and natural gas power plants, which we experience in the macro grid, but we also must think of the energy industry as it's emerging in terms of solar and other elements, wind turbines, et cetera. City government certainly has a role here, both to create focus, create the agenda, and to the extent we're able to provide resources. And just as importantly in so many things, the citizens of Lakewood, you who are taking time out to learn about these issues, are critical to the intellectual growth and survivability and ultimate resiliency to thrive and survive. Now, this is an important little element. We're going to get to know this little word pattern a lot. And our actions and our work will be represented by these words. They are on your handout. The relative size of the letters indicates the priority and the urgency. Let us use this clever depiction as both a trademark of Lakewood, but also a roadmap to our future. More than ever, we should think big, remain disciplined and focused, draw on our intellectual capital as we do, create alignment, anticipate and prepare for a resilient future. It's going to be a great year in Lakewood and an even better future for Lakewood. So thanks for taking the time to listen. It is our custom that we might entertain questions. And I think we also might hear some from Facebook who might be listening as well. So folks, what's on your minds? What might we address today? Anyone? Jack?
I noticed the number of residents we have is slightly above 50,000. And my concern is if we drop below 50,000, as I understand it, funding changes for us. Are we likely to do that, or with the addition of new housing and so forth, we'll go up and not down in living residents?
It's a great question. What Jack Palamecki is questioning is we get some federal money through federal block grants that are given to us directly from the Department of Health and Housing and Urban Development. And they are directed to cities with populations of 50,000 and more directly. Historically, if you've gone below that number, you participated in a pool for those funds, and there's generally less money available in that pool. So Lakewood has been an entitlement community, which is what the category is called, really since the HUD block grants were developed. We're very carefully monitoring that. We have a census in 2020. We take that census very seriously. One of the demographic changes is the low density of houses. We have 30,000 housing units in this town, but what might used to have 2, 3, or 5 people living in that house might have 1. And that's a dramatic shift. And as a consequence, we see these population pieces. One of the solutions is to add more housing, 180 units, more to come. That will help us. We need a good count in 2020 to make sure we get everyone who's here. But I would say that one of the fractured pieces of the federal government is those block grants have been on the chopping block for many years. And for us, it's about $1.8 million a year. And those monies are very, very important to us in supporting the social safety net in our community. We would be very pained to lose them. We may lose them because of federal action. We would be less likely, though, I think, to lose them because of our population. Cleveland Heights remains an entitlement community. Their population is 47,000. Euclid also remains an entitlement community. Both were over 50 at one point, and their population is also in that same 47,000 range. Our case, though, would be cleaner, better, if we can keep our population above 50 and not have to worry about it. But if we do dip below that in 2020, then we're going to be working hard to make the case that the strategy of the funds are still vitally important to a community like Lakewood. Our population density, by the way, helps us enormously. So it may be 50,000 people, but it's 50,000 people in just 5.6 square miles. It's shared on your handout that we actually realize we are ranked number 125 out of 19,300 cities in the country in terms of population density, one being the most densely populated. So we are really in pretty rarefied air, certainly here in Ohio, in the Midwest, and as a practical matter across the country. And when we talk to our regulators, we make sure they understand that there's not a city like Lakewood that you're talking to in so many ways, and that's one of them. So I appreciate the question. Any other questions? Clear as mud? Big ideas? Well, and they're meant to be big ideas. We want to get you to think about these trends. Our strategies have to reflect them. We have a lot of blocking and tackling that we deliver on a daily basis. Core service delivery is essential to everything we do. Picking up our refuse, plowing our streets, filling potholes, improving our street quality, repairing and improving our sewers and our water mains, protecting our citizens on an hour-by-hour basis, both with quick response from a very, very dedicated professional fire department and first responders, our police department, who shows up in force in minutes and dealing with some very compelling issues. And we know that in the public safety side, whether it's fire or whether it's police, we can't let our guard down for a second, not a second. And we're determined to make sure we don't. Question, Harry.
Can you speak a little bit more about the Resiliency Task Force in terms of what its priorities are and how it integrates with the other government agencies?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for asking it. So the subject that we've laid out today, the broad subject, all these forces, is really what resiliency should acknowledge. You can get a sense of the magnitude of the subject. So what we have experienced here in Lakewood disproportionately with great success is our task forces, citizen-led. In this case, we're going to add a professional facilitator, Rethink Advisors, will help shape that subject for action. It's so big, it's so broad. I think the expectation is there may be subgroups on each of these topics that would allow other citizens to get involved. And because the work's so compelling, I think my expectation is that a task force member today likely would roll off to be replaced by another task force member in the future, because this work will be going on for years and years to come. So I would hope that if you're interested in getting involved, you'll let us know, you'll show up to the meetings, you'll learn more about how they're going to structure the work. I think it's very hard work to get started, and that's why we need a good facilitator here. But you can imagine shaping this into smaller bites is, I think, the first order of business. I would say that transportation, for example, which is a magnificent and radical shift, which we now know is likely just around the corner from us, is one that probably should take a higher level of priority because it's imminent. Energy reliability, much more challenging subject in terms of going from the old to the new. A lot of barriers to progress there, of which technology and finance are probably the least. A lot of orthodoxy of the way we've always done it, and regulatory barriers as well. And so that might be a much different approach. I hope that answers your question. So the group has to shape the idea, get some focus to it, break it into small bites, and then figure out how we can make some progress here. Testing ideas, other things that make sense for us. Thank you for the question. Roll.
So on the Resiliency Task Force, actually, I guess I'm interested in knowing who's on it and when there might be some initial meetings for the public. I'd like to, I'm really interested in the subgroups. I think you've got the right word. I'm glad we've got a task force dealing with it. And I'm just really, really interested in where that's headed. I'm
Good.
here that it's in the beginning stages.
Right.
But
It's being formed as we speak. So the City Council is getting its 7 appointments organized as we speak. I have identified the 6 of mine. I was just thinking, if you asked that, could I name them? I don't have that list in front of me. But they do represent links to other institutions that are important to us, such as, they're not all Lakewood residents in my appointments. Links to Cleveland State and their public policy. One of their deans stepped forward. We'd love to have that connection and that intellectual connection. There's a Lakewood resident who serves on the planning of the Port Authority. Port Authority is a key element of providing finance for innovative ideas. So that element of relationship is important to us. We have some folks who have demonstrated the technical experiences in resiliency, and they are on it. And the City Council is working on theirs as well. So I would hope that, I would expect maybe by the end of March, or end of March maybe, we might have a list. And we'll look forward to publishing that on the website. The group's going to need help and support. And my experience with task forces is people will start on, life gets in the way, other priorities emerge, they'll need to bow out, we'll need to make other appointments. And then because the work is so compelling, there will be a longer list and opportunity, especially in these subgroups. Some folks, I think, have a unique skill set in some of the subgroups, and we're going to want to identify that. So hopefully that gives you a sense of where we are. We're just at the beginning. So if you're interested, April, we'd hope you'd step forward, and I know you will. So thanks for asking that question as well. Steve? And I know some of these folks, so I'm grateful to be able to call them by their name. Steve Lamantia.
Yeah, I know, Mr. Mayor, that you're president of or the safety director. In view of some of the problems that we've seen with the schools, the safety issues there, can you discuss any ongoing discussions you've had about ensuring the safety of our students in the schools?
I presume you're talking about the active shooter situation in particular. And I would tell you there's not a day or minute that goes by that Chief Gilman and Police Chief Malley and their squads don't think about that. And each incident creates a new glimpse of what could happen and what we would do differently. And the protocols that we would have employed in those first of those 7 mass shootings over the looking 10 years back are very different than what we would employ today. And I know Chief Gilman thinks long and hard about a fire alarm, which is sort of his world of what happens there. And we know that in Florida that triggered a behavior of the students and how we might rethink what a fire alarm means, both to the exit of the building and maybe the return to the building as a safe harbor. And I know he has active conversations with the school security folks on what we might do differently, learning from that most recent event. Chief Malley and his team, investigator Pat Forelli, worked hard this past August in particular to train every teacher in the school district on the new protocols. They started off with a group training in civic auditorium and have moved to every building to talk about what each teacher needs to do to prepare and anticipate. Lakewood doesn't think for a second that it couldn't happen here. And we worry about it. We prepare for it. We work actively with SWAT teams. The RNC run-up gave us a huge opportunity to prepare for what was a very large sense of security and vulnerability. And we were able to work with some of our EMT squads and the FBI SWAT team. And that was a very high level of training and engagement. We learned a lot there. And we used the school buildings as they were decommissioned as training grounds. We had a lot of training in the school facilities to simulate what might happen. We had citizens who served as active victims of various degrees of wounds, some mental and some physical, and some dead, and what you would do and how you would triage a situation like that. Very live action scenarios in our school buildings right here in Lakewood that give us a sense of how to move, how to act, and how to work together, protect the first responders, but also protect citizens. It's a very live conversation. So we hope this gives you a sense of the seriousness and the magnitude of which we take to train. We fear mightily that we will be called to test those protocols, but we're prepared as best that we know today. That's a sobering question, but it's a good one for a community like ours. And the school board and their relationships are very cooperative in so many ways. Chief Malley or Chief Gilman, do you want anything to add? Do you want to add anything to that?
Real quick, one of the most important things we do ahead of time is try to manage the threats so we don't get to the point of having a situation in the school. So we work hard with the schools to work with their students, to work with the community, to identify children that might be, have some issues, have some problems, and try to get those addressed before we end up having an incident. So we work very hard with the schools in identifying those kids and working with their parents and with some of the social service providers to try to avoid having this type of incident.
And I know that the schools work very hard to listen to their students as well. And they have some of the social media in place today that allows them to hear anonymously concerns and tips that I know many school districts are considering putting into place today. Yeah, good question.
On a lighter note, is there any retail development that's happening in the city that is coming down the pike that maybe you want to share with us that's exciting and fun? Like, when's the distillery opening?
Yeah, yes. Actually, we've been drinking it for years here. Now we're going to distill it and drink it. We're very excited about a significant amount of entrepreneurial development here. In retail today, for the reasons we alluded to, are very challenging in terms of how we purchase items. But we do have a good deal of success of very small boutique shops, and we are welcoming and supportive of them. We have a Startup Lakewood program. We have an entrepreneur in residence. Michael D'Aloia just took that post, replacing the previous entrepreneur who served that post for 7 years. And we work hard to develop these ideas into action and have a high tolerance for experimentation. Our small storefronts were designed for a boutique era. That era generally doesn't fit well in the mass merchandising scale, but some of these retail trends that we worry about may be shifting back, and we want to be supportive of that. But retail is is a challenging one. Bryce, is there anything more you'd want to add to that?
Sure.
Bryce Sylvester, Director of Economic Development.
Yeah, great question.
Why don't you stand?
They're going to be open this summer, so that'll be exciting. Go from that. The good part is Madison is sort of on its own legs now. For the last 5 years, we've made a ton of development up and down. We're most excited about it that it's distributed across the whole board. So it's not focused on just Burger Town,
So your support of these merchants is critical as well, and I know you do. You take that. Well, you've been very kind. I'll stay up here if someone has additional questions, but your challenge is to take some of these big trends that we've identified here, and as you read your newspaper, watch your news, think about your neighborhood, you'll begin to see evidence of old trends and the new trends and our opportunity to reshape what is a 100-year-old, well-designed city. One that was designed for a different time and place, but that design fundamentally, if you were to build a city today, would look pretty much like we have today. So our second century will leverage these inherent strengths, and they'll capitalize on your energies. And we look to a great second century and certainly the next decade, and we're going to work together to make that happen. So let's adjourn here. Thank you for being here tonight.